Hi guys, welcome back to In Case of Econ Struggles. We'll get to another AP Micro Struggle. Today we're talking about topics 2.1 and topic 2.2, which are demand and supply. Here are the things the College Board wants you to know about these two topics. First, we're going to talk about the law of demand. Specifically, we're going to talk about why demand slopes downward. We're also going to talk about why the supply curve slopes upward. And then we're also going to talk about why and how both the demand and the supply curve shift. So timestamps are below if you would like to jump around, but let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to start talking about is the law of demand, and to do that, I'm going to use Bill to help me. And specifically, we're going to talk about Bill's decision to buy the soda or not to buy the soda. It's going to be based on the price of the soda. So if the price is less than $2, then Bill is going to buy the soda, so his demand is one soda. And if the price is anywhere above or at $2, he is not going to buy the soda. So this is why his demand curve looks something like this. You can see already it's downward sloping because as the price gets lower and lower, Bill becomes willing to buy the soda. Now you can imagine that Bill is not the only person maybe in this grocery store who's looking to buy soda. So how can you find the market demand curve? Well, you can just add up the individual demand curves of every person in that grocery store for soda, and you will have a market demand for soda. So for example, maybe Deborah is also in this grocery store, and maybe Deborah's demand curve is this purple dotted line here. And if we know that Bill's demand curve is this orange dotted line here, we can just add them together. Remember, adding means we're adding this way. So that means that the market demand curve is the sum of Bill and Deborah. So here, Deborah is buying soda, but Bill is not. And then once we get to $2, Bill decides to buy his one soda. So the demand curve comes out to an additional quantity. And then we keep following the total quantity of both Bill and Deborah. So again, we're sort of adding horizontally rather than vertically. But you can imagine that if we had a whole bunch of people in their individual demand curves, the overall demand curve might look something like a straight line with a downward slope. Here's some other reasons why the demand curve slopes downward, and the fact that the demand curve slopes downward is what we call the law of demand. So first, if the price of something goes up, so if the price of soda goes up, then maybe you just feel poorer because you're buying soda still, but each soda costs more money, so you're more inclined to buy less soda, so the quantity goes down, and that's what we call the income effect. The other thing that might happen is if you like soda and maybe the price of Pepsi starts going up, maybe you decide to switch to Coke instead. Maybe you don't like Coke as much, but because the price of Pepsi is going up, you feel more inclined to switch to the cheaper good, which is Coke. So the quantity of Pepsi is going to go down, and that's what we call the substitution effect because you're substituting away from the more expensive good. The third reason why the demand curve slopes downward is you have diminishing marginal utility, which we've talked about in a previous video. Or as anyone gets more and more soda, the extra utility they're getting from that soda becomes less and less. And if we know that people's willingness to pay is based on how much extra utility they get from buying that soda, if their extra utility from buying that soda goes down as they get more soda, then the price also needs to go down if they're going to buy more soda. Let's talk really quickly about the difference between moving along the demand curve and shifting the demand curve. If just the price is changing, then we're just moving along this demand curve. But if something happens to make it such that maybe Bill wants less soda at every price, so he doesn't care what the price is, he just wants less soda than before at every possible price level of soda, then we're going to shift the demand curve to the left. You might also call this a downward shift in the demand curve. The reason I like to call it a leftward shift in the demand curve is because really what's happening is that this is how much soda you wanted at this price level before, and now you want less soda at that price level, so you're going to move left to some other point here. The reason that this becomes a vertical line is because you can't buy less than 0 sodas. But really what's happening, again, if you want to buy less quantity, you're moving left. So it's a leftward or downward shift in the demand curve, whatever helps you remember this easier. And unsurprisingly, if you have a positive shift in demand, if people want more soda at every price point, you're going to shift the demand curve up or you're going to shift the demand curve to the right. Again, you're shifting it to the right because this quantity right here at this price level, you now want more quantity at that same price level, so you're moving to the right. Let's switch sides of the market now and talk about the supply curve. And to talk about the supply curve, we're going to talk about Deb from Deb's Donuts. So Deb is the owner of Deb's Donuts, and we're trying to think about why her supply curve slopes upward. The reason her supply curve slopes upwards is pretty simple. Deb is trying to think about how she can make the most money. And so her production, how many donuts she makes in the back, is based on how much her customers are paying for each donut. So you can imagine if they're paying $2 for each donut, maybe I'll make a few donuts so that the people who come in that I really like can get a donut. But suddenly, if everyone's willing to pay $10, if the price of a donut is $10 per donut, you can bet that Deb is going to be in the back just absolutely cranking out donuts because she knows for each donut she sells, she's going to get a whole lot more at $10 than at $2. So it's unsurprising that Deb wants to make more donuts and sell more donuts if the price is $10 rather than $2, which means the supply curve is upward sloping. Just like we saw with demand, Deb is probably not the only donut game in town, so if we take all the donut shops in town and we sort of add up their individual supply curves, we're going to get a market supply curve that is upward sloping and maybe looks something like this. Just like we can shift or follow the demand curve, we can shift or follow along the supply curve. Again, if we're just shifting the price, we're moving along the supply curve. But if something happens where Deb says, I sort of want to make less donuts at every price point, maybe it's the case that her other costs like her rent or electricity go up. So now even though she's still receiving $10 per donut, those other costs are so high that she's like, I don't really feel like making as many donuts at $10 per donut that I did before. So that's a leftward shift in supply, as you can see by these lovely little green arrows. And if something happens where her costs go down or she suddenly gets a whole lot better at making donuts, maybe at that $10 she was willing to crank out a bunch of donuts before, but now she knows how to crank out even more donuts with the same amount of time and energy. So she's going to crank out a lot more donuts at $10, but also at every price point of donuts. So her supply curve is going to shift up or to the right or out and to the right. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of supply and demand. We'll start talking about market equilibrium in the next couple of videos, but if this was helpful, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time for another case of econ struggles.